everyone. Hello, and this is our first in a series of 6 virtual lunch and lawn sessions. This is a new program sponsored by Fairfax County Master Gardeners Association, and we are a volunteer nonprofit organization along with Virginia and Fairfax County Cooperative Extension programs. We provide research-based horticultural information to home gardeners in Fairfax County. So we're very excited to be here. This is the first, as I said, of 6, and it'll be 45 minutes long for each program. And we are very happy to answer your questions on lawns and weeds. This program is being recorded, so please keep your microphones muted. And if you have any questions that you didn't submit during the registration process, please feel free to enter them in the chat box, and we will try to answer them toward the end of the program. Well, my name is Jenny, and I'm the host of today's Master Gardener panel, and I'm joined by Susan. Hi, Susan. And Hillary. Hi, Hillary. Okay, so our program is divided into 3 parts. And first, I'll give you a quick, short topic on lawn care. And then Susan and Hillary will each go into detail on 2 different types of weeds that you're very likely to see in your yard now. And then finally, we'll get to the lawn questions that were entered through the registration process. And if time allows, we'll get to the chat box questions. So today's topic is on cool season grasses and the renovation that is really the time to do it is now. And several questions were submitted in the registration process, and I believe that this topic will get to most of those, to answer most of those, and having a better, healthier lawn for the coming spring. You know, the big caveat is that temperatures will need to cooperate, which means that usually we wait till September or October to start this process as the temperatures cool down. July and August are really stressful months for grass with the high heat and humidity, so the appearance of our lawns is somewhat expected. So all of you that wrote in about yellow or brown patches or wilting lawns, all is not lost. When the weather cools down, and if you follow some renovation practices during this fall, you should get back to a healthy lawn next spring. So the first slide that I have is our lawn calendar. And you can see that taking care of your lawns has an annual cycle, so you're never really done. The focus, but that said, before you get started, the better you can plan out what you do, the better your outcomes will be. And a key part of that is a soil test. This test identifies your soil pH and the key micronutrients that are available in your soil. So along with which you will need to measure your lawn area. This will actually be the topic of our next lunch and lawn session, but you don't need those items for today's talk. The focus, as I said, is cool season grasses, which are a majority of what we have in Northern Virginia. So right now in late summer through October, here you see that it's time for core aeration and top dressing. The following slide that I have will show you about core aeration. Next is overseeding. And here you want to have 2 to 3 pounds of good quality seed per 1,000 square feet of lawn that you want to renovate. If you find your lawn is susceptible to lawn diseases, that this would be the opportunity to look for grass seed that is resistant, somewhat resistant to these types of diseases for your reseeding project. And fall really is the best time for reseeding because the soil temperatures are above 50 degrees, and this helps germination. It's the same principle for planting your gardens. In the springtime, if the ground is too cold, your seeds will not germinate. So fall, March and April, not so good, but fall is really the best time. And then next is the opportunity for addressing some of the winter weeds that will be coming into the forefront. If you are going to think about applying a post-emergent weed killer, it's probably not the best to do it in tandem with reseeding, because if you do it too close in front of or behind your reseeding, you're likely to prevent seeds from germinating or kill them. But if you do have a lot of weeds, if they're large right now, go ahead and hand pull them before you core aerate and overseed, or top dress, because those weeds will get in the way of seeds making contact with the ground. And also, if these bigger weeds are out of the way, your newly sprouting lawn won't have to compete with them for sunlight, nutrients, and water. And if you pull your weeds, really be sure to knock as much soil off the roots as possible, because you don't want to lose your valuable topsoil. And then a quick word about fertilizing. You'll see this line here for fertilizing. That assumes that you know what you've got going on in your yard and why the soil test is so important. The fall is the best time because here you are feeding the roots of your grass, and that over the winter will be storing energy, so it will help the green growth in the spring. And really, if you do this, you won't have to fertilize in the spring because your grass is already prepared for it. And then also not to fertilize during the summer, because this will encourage that lush top growth. And because the soil temperature is much warmer in the summer, your roots have stopped growing. So roots stop growing along with this lush growth on top will really stress your plant. They just can't keep up with the growth. And also this lush growth is kind of an invitation to some of the funguses that will be around in the soil and the air. So it's really best to keep your fertilization program towards the fall time frame. So next is a slide on core aeration. And you see in the top left, somebody pushing what would be more what you would find the do-it-yourself or rent equipment kind of machine. It's a little bit awkward, but it's doable. The things that you will see in the lower left, these are the cores. They are the plugs that punch into the ground and will flip the soil sample cores up to the top. The soil sample, you'll see the core there laying on top of the ground. So leave it there. They will decompose and break down in the next couple of weeks. And this will help add to the nutrients in the topsoil level. The next is the top dressing. And here you see this is a fine textured compost that has probably been dumped in piles and then raked out. So you'll want to have it more evenly distributed, like in the bottom corner versus having a big bare patch of green in the middle. That's how you kind of know where you have, laid out your organic product. And this is just a quick graphic that shows you why it is so important to go over and do the coration before you have compacted soil, which means that the little spaces between soil particles aren't allowing your moisture and nutrients and plant roots to grow. So once you open that up with the core aeration, you do get extra oxygen and water, and it will encourage your new roots to go deeper. So after about 8 to 10 weeks, your root structure is a lot more vigorous. And you will also want to think about, in terms of this root structure, that the, that you want to have, when you do the core aeration, have the machine or the service that you might be hiring to go over 2 or 3 times, because you'll want to see 25 to 40 of these plugs in your soil to make sure that this is of maximum value to your lawn. And as I mentioned, you know, the little do-it-yourself is good, but I would advise really to go with a professional service, because they have a much heavier duty machine, and it is a lot easier and well worth the price for having this service performed. So in kind of a nutshell, oh, I'm sorry, but after you plant your lawn, and one important thing, or you plant your seeds, the reason for the top dressing and letting your cores decompose on the surface is that it has maximum contact with your seeds, and you will want to make sure you plan ahead for this, because you'll have to water your lawn daily, 2 or 3, at least 2 times a day, morning and evening, in order to make sure your seeds germinate and have the opportunity to grow. And so after about 10 days or so, your seeds should be established, and then you'll want to wait maybe another week before you actually mow. So 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks after you plant your lawn seeds is what you'll do to begin tending your lawn on a regular basis. So with that, I will introduce Susan to talk about one of her weeds for the day. Susan?
Okay, thank you, Jenny. And I'm going to get this slideshow going so we can get this started. Sorry. All right. Can everyone see it? Are we good? Okay, so thank you. And I'm going to talk about the wild violet. You've all seen this. This is a beautiful little purple flower that's growing on this sturdy little plant. And you see it in your lawns, in your gardens, along the side of the path, just about everywhere. And why? Because these little plants are really aggressive weeds. And you stop and admire these weeds, and then you curse them as you try to get them out of your lawn. So these are perennial broadleaf weeds, and they're really easy to identify. They usually have these heart-shaped or oblong-shaped leaves and with serrated edges. They grow in a rosette habit out of a basal crown. Now, they grow from rhizomes. You can see that fibrous root system, but there's also a big rhizome in there. And this rhizome, if you're going to pull this weed, you have to get this rhizome completely out of the ground, or you're going to grow new little plants. And that's why this weed is so hard to eliminate. You can hand pull or dig these out, but if you don't get that rhizome, then the plants are going to reemerge, or those little seeds that came out earlier, the flowers that came out earlier went to seed pods and they spread by seed. So they get you both above and below the ground. You can use a chemical if you want, such as tricloper, but it's going to really require multiple applications in order to defeat this little weed. So your best advice to keep from having to dig or use chemicals to keep this out of your lawn is to maintain a very healthy and dense lawn so that it doesn't have a chance to take root. While these little plants really thrive in moist, sandy soils, they really manage to grow just about anywhere if they can find a foothold. And once they're established, they really are pretty drought resistant. But before you go away thinking that this is probably the worst little weed you've ever seen, you may want to keep in mind that this is actually a native plant, and it's the primary food source for the fritillary butterflies. So, for many reasons, this is a little weed that you can both love and hate at the same time.
Well, thanks, Susan. I mean, I think, you know, we are quick to dismiss weeds, and so we forget what a value they are to insects and pollinators in our environment. So Very nice. Hillary?
And that's the perfect lead into my weed, which is, it's going to show up in all our lawns sooner or later. It's called Kalinga. And it's a weed that you most often don't know you have until it's well established and very difficult to get rid of. It often appears in the lawn as a mysterious clump, which you can see in the slide. The outer edges of the slide show a healthy lawn, but right in the middle, and sometimes very difficult to see, is a clump of Kalinga. It's a non-native weed that started to appear in this area, Northern Virginia, around the 1980s. It's been well established in the Deep South for over 50 years, thriving in hot, wet areas. It's very difficult to identify because of other varieties and species that are so similar, both Kalingas and sedges. A couple of different Kalingas exist in the US, some preferring the hot South, some preferring everywhere else that is warm and damp, from Rhode Island to Florida to Texas and along the Pacific in California. The variety we have here is Kalinga gracillima, more commonly known as false green Kalinga, which seems to prefer inland areas rather than coastal areas. It's very difficult to identify until it's well established, thriving, and in fact, it takes a botanist with a microscope to determine the differences. They look very similar to both yellow and purple nutsedge. And they're also happy to be mowed very low to the ground. It's only when their seed heads appear, which you can just start to see also in this slide, that they are more distinctive, by which time their rhizome root system is also well established and thriving. Now, in this slide, you get a good look at everything. In garden beds, the weed is fairly easy to dig up with a tool, but in the lawn, it's a different story because of its really tough root system. They usually spread from surrounding lawns, often appearing first along the edge of the street. At first look, it looks like a grass with fine, glossy, light green leaf blades. The color is very similar to its cousin, yellow nutsedge, but yellow nutsedge grows tall and erect, while Kalinga crouches low and grows in clumps until it becomes a mat, and then you can't miss it. The flowers now also have a very distinct appearance, which you'll notice in the third slide. The flower tuft is composed of about 50 tiny flowers, each of which can produce a seed. The flower tuft is surrounded by 3 long, narrow leaves. And the symmetry of these leaves is what makes it easy to identify. Controlling this weed is tricky. The toughest lawn weeds to control have 3 criteria. They're perennials, they have an extensive root system, in this case, rhizomes, and they're prolific seed producers. Kalinga fits all of these 3 criteria, and they thrive in lawns that are overwatered. According to Dr. Sean Askew, a weed expert at Virginia Tech, there are 3 known chemicals that can be used to treat lawn invasions of Kalinga. 2 are post-emergent, and 1 is a pre-emergent that is only moderately helpful. The active ingredients in the post-emergence are imazosulfuron and halosulfuron methyl. In the pre-emergent, it's dimethenamide. Kalinga usually requires prolonged attention with more applications over following years. A non-chemical option would be to cut out the Kalinga as if you're cutting out a chunk of sod, and then replace it with tall fescue. And also, considering the amount of water to be applied to the lawn, reducing water favors fescue over kalinga.
Okay, thanks, Hillary. So which would you choose, kalinga or nutsedge?
Oh, tough question. They're both a lawn nightmare.
Yeah. Okay, so next we've got the start of our questions from people in the audience, and this is from Stacy. Are you online, Stacy?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi. Okay.
Hi.
Is this from your lawn, or is it from a wilder area in your yard?
Well, my backyard is pretty much a wild area, I would say, in general. So it's just one of the areas in my backyard.
That you're trying to eventually grow into a lawn?
Correct.
So, you know, there is hope. Most of these things, here we've identified, stilt grass up in the left is an invasive weed, and you really, for all weeds, you really want to get them before they form their seed heads or flowers. And this in particular is very easy to pull out because it's got a very shallow and weak root system, where oxalis has more of a tap root. And that is also something that you can pull out by hand. But, you know, a little bit more patience might be required. Crabgrass has a very thick root in the center, kind of hairy, fibrous, so that may take a little bit more digging. You'll need the right kind of tool to get to it. And likewise, this morning glory is something that should be relatively easy to pull out, as well as the summer spurge. I mean, anything with a tap root, if you have a tool that helps you get under it and break it, will be helpful. Now, I did a weed presentation through the virtual plant clinic on August the 6th. So if folks would like some information on weeds and managing weeds without the application of chemicals, you might try to refer to that. It's on the VCE YouTube web channel. So the next slide that Stacy has is, you know, very similar looking weeds, white clover versus oxalis. And again, the oxalis would be easier to get out. The clover has more of a stolen way of growing through your lawn. But as we talked with Susan's little violet, the clovers are actually good for the pollinators. So if you don't mind a little clover, I mean, as with anything, if you don't mind a little messiness, these things are good because they also have nodules on their root systems that help contribute nitrogen to your soil. And this one is, sorry to say, not grass, but wheat. So, Susan, did you want to say a few words about nimblewill? I know this is one of the ones that
yeah, that's another weed I've kind of gotten acquainted with lately, and it's a grass. It's really a grass, and so you can consider it a weed or an important grass in your lawn. You can see it's very thin leaves, and they're short. They're, you know, like maybe a couple inches or less long. I think one of the key things to remember about nimblewill is while it's a perennial, it is a warm weather grass. So it's like the last to green up in the spring and the first to go in the fall. So it can actually look like you've got dead spots in your lawn, but it's really just nimbleweed being nimbleweed. So you can get rid of it. You can dig it up, but you have to really get those roots because it has these really fibrous root systems and they're very fine. So those roots are likely to stay in the ground. You can, of course, use chemicals like a glyphosate, but depends on how badly involved it is and how badly you want to get rid of it.
And the other item you have there is crabgrass, and that will die off with the first frost. So, but it, again, will come back, especially if you let it go to seed, because weed seeds or any type of seed is actually viable in the soil for several years. And anytime you disturb the soil, it kind of, makes it wake up and say, okay, time to sprout. So getting to weeds before they seed is really important. Okay, so this is not a weed. Tell us what's going on here.
So he just, he has one area that he goes to the bathroom in general. And so I just wanted to know, like, how do I maintain that area so that it won't just be brown all the time? Like, yeah. Or if I should just, I don't know, just create a spot for him and call it good.
More likely the latter. But if the side of it is troubling you and your dog will tolerate it, you could just try building a little frame around it and put mulch or gravel or something, because you're lucky that he does have a go-to spot.
Mm-hmm.
That's really great. But the other thing is, you mentioned flooding.
Yeah. So my patio area, when it rains, it floods and it goes, and it actually, the water recedes to his spot. So he always is very upset when it rains. And so, but it takes a really long time to recede. And that area never really, I've only been here since November, but it's never been really able to grow anything because it just is always so wet. Because like I said, every time it rains, it pretty much floods the patio and then goes into that grassy, that non-grassy area. It's more like mud now.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, one thing is try to look at a way to control the water running off your patio. You might be able to put a French drain or something like that. I mean, you would really have to consult with some other people, but it would be key to work on that flooding, because it'll give your grass area a chance to grow, and it won't upset your little friend. Okay, and this, you said you weren't sure. Did you see the flowers this spring?
No.
You weren't there. So you weren't there. So my thought is that these are grape hyacinths, that they can also grow in the wild, because they have these bulbs very near to the surface. And they multiply. You see all these little bulblets forming around them.
Mm-hmm.
And so here's a picture of them growing in a wild state. And if you like this look, some people do, you can naturalize it, let it grow in your lawn. It just makes lawn care a little bit more tricky, because you want to mow around it until after it finishes seeding. My lawn, I have crocuses that march across in the spring, and just by the end of March, they're done blooming, and then they look like regular lawns. So, that's another approach if you like these types of wild plants in your yard, although it does have a habit of getting out of control. So like violets, you'll want to dig up these bulbs and you give them to friends maybe. But at any rate, it's up to you to decide whether you actually like them or not. Okay, so let's get to, thank you, Stacey, for sharing all that.
No problem.
So we're going to get to questions now that other registrants had submitted when they decided to register for this clinic. So Hillary, did you have some of those questions?
I do. I have, the first question I have is about nut sedge, yellow sedge, that we were talking about a little bit earlier. And the question is there a way to get rid of sedge forever? Not without a lot of commitment. The best way to get rid of it is to find it when it's young. So as early as possible in the year, and the way sedge appears, which makes it different from the Kalinga I spoke about earlier, is it sort of it grows very high. There are usually 3 spires. I'd have to call the blades more like spires, lime green spires that stick straight up. And if you can get it, then it has a root that's relatively easy to pull. Not long after that, it sort of matures into more like 5 spires that can be quite tall. But by this time, it's also established the nut part, and that's what makes it tricky to get rid of. So at that point, the best thing to do is persistent hand, I don't want to say pulling, but treatment by hand. I have a tool that I just think is wonderful, and it's called a cobra head. It's a hook with a cobra head on the end of it, and that enables you to dig under the nut roots and pull the whole weed up fairly easily. And a little bit of persistence with a tool like that can help you get beyond the problem. If it's just too persistent, or you really want to get rid of it once and for all, there is a chemical called halosulfuron, specifically known as sedge hammer. It's for getting rid of this. And that would be a last resort, but that's between those 2 methods, I think you can get rid of sedge forever. And then I think I also had a second question while I'm here. The question is, do plants like citronella, catnip, and sage work to keep mosquitoes away? The short answer is probably not. Citronella can work for some people, and but only for a brief time. And the way to do this would be to just take a leaf and crush it and rub it on your skin. But obviously that is only going to work for a short time. Unless you can fill your whole backyard with just a field of one of these plants, in which case that would be the most effective. Probably the best thing you can do to deal with the whole mosquito issue, rather than trying to find these plants that will keep them away, is just be vigilant about looking for water accumulating anywhere. And I'm sure you've all heard that something as small as a thimbleful can be a problem. And one of the areas that we don't often think about are our rain gutters, which collect leaf matter, which packs down into dense, damp, organic matter. And it's the last place we think of, but it's probably mosquito breeding heaven. Mosquito dunks are probably your most effective treatment. Now, they're very effective in that they're safe for birds and insects. They're not detrimental to them in any way. In dealing with rain gutters, I spoke to one of our leading lawn experts, and he is somebody who used to play baseball, said that he's been known to use these mosquito dunks and just lob them up into his gutter. And apparently quite effective. He said eventually when you see all the debris run out of your gutter, the remains of those mosquito dunks are there, and he thinks that's a good way to treat them. So provided you've got a baseball arm, I think that's a good one to try.
Thank you, Hillary. Yeah, that's not one that I could do.
No, me neither, but you've got to have the baseball arm.
Right, right. So I had a question from Martha M, and also I see that Dennis has one in the chat about stiltgrass. Martha's problem is that it seems to have taken over a wide swath of her lawn, and Dennis is growing up in his bushes. So like I mentioned, stiltgrass is very easy to pull out, and if you start trying to spray for it, you're more likely going to get to damage plants that you don't want to damage. And you know, if you catch it young, you could almost literally grab a handful and pull straight up and it will come out. So you do want to stay on top of it because it's a very invasive weed, and our natural forest land areas are really having a difficult time because of the invasion. And that's a problem because it reduces the diversity of the plants and other vegetation in those areas. So stay on top of stiltgrass. And as I said, it is very, very easy to pull. And if you go back to the weed presentation from August 6th, that will give you other strategies and ideas for working weeds in your garden with really minimal use of chemical sprays. Susan, did you get a question on some type of insect?
Yes, I did. So if we have time, I'll go ahead and very quickly address Suzanne's question. Suzanne said she has something excavating small holes between stepping stones on the edge of her lawn, and it's leaving a mess of clay, and asked if that could be the cicada wasp and what should she do about it if it is. And Suzanne, that may very well be a cicada wasp. The cicada wasps are actually solitary wasps. They're ground nesting and they're native to the United States, and they get their name because they kill cicadas. One thing to know is that only the females can sting, and they're really not aggressive wasps, so you don't have to worry about them unless you provoke them. So keep your distance. These wasps feed on nectar, but they kill those cicadas and drag them down in their burrow so that they can actually feed their babies. And that's ergo the name cicada killer. So, you know, if you said it's growing in an area and creating a mess, but if you can live with that, the best thing to do is just leave it alone, because this is just a natural part of the cycle, and you probably are going to see a whole lot of them next year with the 17-year cycle of cicadas coming through. But if it's in an area where you really need to discourage it, and normally you would just keep your lawn dense and the soil of a good quality, but you said it's in a walkway. So if you keep that area really moist, it'll discourage the female from building or nest in that area. They don't like moist dirt. They want it kind of sandy and dry.
Suzanne had another question about mowing her lawn right after reseeding. And so this would be the time where you would need to wait 3 weeks to make sure that that grass has established itself and is sturdy enough to withstand the mowing action. I think we have maybe time for one more online question. Hillary, can you tell what type of grass somebody has?
Yes, and it's a great question. And I also will try to be quick, seeing as time is running out. There are 2 categories of residential grasses: cool season and warm season. Cool season grasses include tall fescue, Kentucky bluegrass, and annual and perennial ryegrasses. Warm season grasses include zoysia and Bermuda grass. Warm and cool grasses have different growing cycles. If your grass stays green throughout the year, then it's a cool season grass, whereas a warm season grass dies back and turns a sort of straw color, a tan color, right at the first frost. And then again, that's coming early May, it will turn green again. Cool season grasses are generally intolerant of hot summer, which is why we are talking about the problems that we are right now. And they will slow their growth, their top growth, whereas warm season grasses just thrive. Most of the grasses in Northern Virginia are the cool season variety, predominantly tall fescue.
Okay, thanks.
Jenny, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. So one last question is, what is the best for a shady backyard?
Oh, wow. Shady backyard. Yes. Thank you, Carola. I hope I pronounced your name right. Asked what seed is best for a very shady backyard. So I'm gonna say that fescue is your best turf grass for shade tolerance. Notice I said shade tolerance. You might find that as a shade blend, or which would include some tall fescue or varieties of fine fescue. Even being shade tolerant, it still needs at least 4 hours of sunlight every day. Some of the things you might need to know is it has a low water requirement, which is good, but it doesn't tolerate poorly drained soils, and it does not tolerate traffic. So because of those, you said it's very shady, so you might want to think about alternatives to grass, such as ground covers, or maybe you know planting that area with shade tolerant shrubs or perennials, or you could just use a mulch cover as a cover.
Great, thank you, Susan. So we're winding down right now. If we didn't get to your question, if you had submitted it in the registration, we'll try to respond to you via email. If you were in the chat box and we didn't get to it, try registering that question in next session's Lunch and Lawn. So let me do my one final slide. And so this is, thank you very much for attending. Next time around on August the 26th, the topic will be do-it-yourself soil test, and the weeds will be Japanese stiltgrass, so more on the stiltgrass that we got questions on, and red sorrel. So register at the same URL that you did for this week. One of the things that, so there is a large body of research on what it takes to have a healthy lawn, as well as minimizing weeds and diseases. So fairfaxgardening.org has many articles and has quick links to resources and a monthly newsletter. Interestingly enough, if you look under the gardening or the calendar section, the gardening calendar, there is the first of a 3-part series on fall lawn maintenance. So you can check that out. And then there's also, if you are looking for topics, go to .edu or .gov sites to make sure that you get unbiased and research-based responses and information. And Virginia Tech is our go-to university website, since that's our parent organization. So you can also refer to like the past videos for both plant clinics, and this should be on this YouTube channel as well, VCE Fairfax County YouTube. So go ahead and check that out. So again, I hope that you got most of your questions answered, and the information on wild violets and on Kalinga, we hope will be on our home turf link through Fairfax Gardening, so you can look at that. And with that, I want to thank the Virginia Cooperative Extension and Fairfax County Master Gardener Association for supporting this program. So thank you, and we will see you next time.